It's wonderful to be with you again. My name is Jason Dexter, and today we are continuing our study of the book of Revelation, and we're in Revelation chapter 14. In the last lesson, chapter 13, we saw what Satan was doing. We saw how he used the first and the second beasts, that is the Antichrist and the false prophet, to push forward his agenda in this world. And we see that they will be pushing people, in essence, to be worshipers of Satan. It will be a very dark and a very terrible time for world history. So in the midst of this darkest of times, what is God going to be doing? That's the question that we're going to look at today. So we're going to read together in Revelation 14, and we'll read it in three parts. The first part, verses 1 through 5, will be about the Lamb and the 144,000, and then the three angelic messages, and then the harvest of the earth. So I'm going to read first verses 1 through 5. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the Lord, and before the four living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. So we're going to go into verse by verse to look at the details of this passage. But first, I just want us to take a moment and look at the big picture. Satan is doing his work, but God is doing his work. And God's work is sovereign to and above the work that Satan is doing. So even though Satan is persecuting, killing believers all around the globe, here we see in chapter 14, God is still doing his work. He is still choosing his people. And he chooses 144,000 witnesses. These are actually witnesses who are witnessing to others. There's many, many more who are coming to Christ during this period in time. So we should not come to think of Revelation as a time when God is absent or when God has abandoned this world. It's not like that at all. God is always working, and he will be working at that time in the future as well. So let's look at verse 1, and we'll get into the text here. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. So it says, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb. The chronology of this verse is not so clear. Revelation 19 describes Jesus' physical return, the second coming. But here in chapter 14, it shows him as standing on Mount Zion. Note that Zechariah 14:4 says he was set foot on the Mount of Olives. So there's many different interpretations as to what's going on in this passage. One interpretation is that Revelation is not entirely chronological. That chapter 14 and chapter 19 both describe Jesus' second coming from different perspectives. Another view is that Jesus is standing on Mount Zion in some sort of spiritual sense. In Revelation chapter 1, it depicts Jesus as walking among the seven golden lampstands. So those who hold this view say Jesus spiritually is standing on Mount Zion, meaning he hasn't abandoned his people. He is still involved. He is still walking among us. He is still working in us, which does also make some sense. Another view is that Mount Zion here refers to heaven rather than the Mount Zion in Israel. Jesus is described in Revelation 9 as being in heaven, and then again in Revelation 19 as actually coming from heaven to this earth. So this view might make the most sense, although we cannot be 100% sure. Hebrews 12:22 says, "You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem." So in this passage, we see Mount Zion described as being in heaven. And later, this heavenly Jerusalem will come down from heaven to the earth, the New Jerusalem. So Revelation 14:3 also shows that the 144,000 are singing a song, and it says they're doing it before the throne. So according to this view, this is a poetic way, a very poetic way of saying these 144,000 witnesses have been killed. They've been taken up to God's presence in heaven. They're now in front of the throne. In fact, they're clearly not on earth, because they wouldn't be singing God's praises in front of the throne on earth, because his throne is not on earth. So this is also a way of comforting God's people. They have been purchased, and they are the first fruits of the other Jews who will come to know him throughout the tribulation period. It says that they are sealed by him, and that sealing is evidence that they are protected by God until their mission of evangelism is complete. We see that sealing in Revelation 7:3. Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. So God seals these 144,000 to protect them until their mission is complete. We saw the result of their mission were multitudes and multitudes of people in front of the throne praising God. Now, whichever view you hold, the main points are actually finally the same. That is, the 144,000 belong to God. They're set apart for him, and they live for him. And most importantly, it reminds us Jesus will not abandon them. So the main point from this is that God is working, even though it will appear to be the darkest, the bleakest time in world history. It will look to be hopeless with no light at the end of the tunnel. God's people being martyred and killed and persecuted all around the world. Yet here's this reminder that he is claiming his saints for his own, and he has not abandoned them. Now, these saints, it says in verse 1, they have his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. They're sealed by God, and they belong to him. We've seen that the Antichrist is going to be forcing people to take the mark, and the world will be basically divided into two camps. There's no room for being in the middle. There's no room for being undecided or agnostic. You either choose to follow Satan and you take his mark, or you choose to follow the Lamb and you take his mark, this sealing. And that choice is going to be a very public one, marked clearly on your forehead. So these 144,000 have made their choice. They belong to his camp. Verse 2 says, I heard a voice from heaven, and they were singing a new song. John describes this voice like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder, and like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. Now, it's hard to imagine a sound that combines all of these elements. Verse, you see, it's mighty, and at the same time, it is graceful and melodious. And the 144,000 are singing a song to the Lord, a unique song known only to them. So God's voice, loud, thunderous, but also graceful and melodious. It's not the only place in Scripture that compares God's voice to being like water. Water can be a very pleasant sound. You might use it as white noise, raindrops, or waves to go to sleep. But if you've been near a powerful waterfall, you know that it can also be very loud and deafening. And a powerful tsunami or tidal wave can wash away everything in front of it. So in response to this voice, the 144,000 sing their song. They're singing a new song before the throne. It seems to be a song that's unique to them and known only by them. It says no one could learn that song except the 144,000. Now from this, we can see that some songs are so personal and intimate and experiences that they just can't be shared with everyone. So some worship songs might be private, just from you to God. So there's an application here as well. Consider writing your own praise hymn to the Lord. It doesn't have to be posted on iTunes. It doesn't have to be a perfect tune or melody. You can simply sing it to the Lord in the privacy of your own devotion time. Now, these also have not defiled themselves with women. They will be celibate. Now, Paul taught in 1 Corinthians about the advantages of singleness. 1 Corinthians 7:1 says, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman." And then also 1 Corinthians 7:32 through 34. "I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord." Then it goes on to say that the married man is concerned about how to please his wife. Now, even in normal times, there are advantages to being single. A believer who is single can devote all of his time and energy to serving the Lord without distraction. So those of you who are single should not consider that this is a curse. In fact, it is also a blessing. You can use this time of singleness in your life to serve God even more. You have more time and more energy available to give to the Lord. Some people always think that the grass is greener on the other side. If I could just get married, then everything will be solved, everything will be okay, everything will be happy. And marriage is very good. I'm married very happily so, and it is a great blessing from God. But the grass is not always greener on the other side, whichever side you are on. The grass is green right where we are. Let us be content in the situation we are, knowing that God put us here in this time for a purpose in order to serve Him. Now, if even now singlehood can be very advantageous for serving the Lord, how much more will it be then in the future when there will be great persecution and great tribulation, a virtual state of war between believers and the Antichrist? And what is more, these witnesses will know their time is short. They know that they're being sent out from God into a terrible world filled with tribulation and that they're going to be martyred very soon. In that situation, is it the right time to settle down and raise a family? It doesn't seem that would be a suitable time. These evangelists will be constantly risking their lives for the gospel, and they will be better able to do this without the distraction and pressure of trying to raise a family, which would constantly be pulling them in two directions. Their singleness is a sign of their complete devotion to the Lord. They're going to give the Lord everything they have, giving up all rights and comforts for the sake of fighting in this war and building His kingdom. In a very real sense, their marriage is to the Lamb. He is the one they are seeking to please. Now note that the Lord also selects single virgins to be in this special force of world evangelists. He intentionally chooses those who are best suited for this mission. So we should ask ourselves the question, how dedicated are you to the Lord? What are you willing to give up? Are you willing to live a life of singleness for Him, if that's what He calls you to do? Are you willing to give up pleasures and comforts? Are you willing to risk your life? God certainly doesn't call all believers to these things. He doesn't call all believers to singlehood, but He does call us to live for Him and not for the world. And doing that requires real sacrifice. Are you willing to make that sacrifice for serving the Lord? Now, another thing that we see about these 144,000, it says, it is these who follow the Lamb wherever He goes. That's what a true disciple should do. When Jesus called the 12, He said, "Follow me." It isn't always easy. Many times He may call us to go somewhere that's very difficult. And just as Jesus gave His life for the mission, so these witnesses are going to be doing the same. We are called to follow Him. Matthew 20:22, Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" This was about John and James, who are asking to sit on His right and left hand in the coming kingdom. And Jesus says, are you able to do the same thing I'm going to do? Are you able to even give your life for this mission for serving God? And we should ask ourselves, are we willing to follow Him anywhere? Are we willing to drink the cup that He drank? Now, in addition to following him wherever he goes, it says these have been redeemed from mankind as the first fruits for God. Now, first fruits are generally the best of the harvest. They're the low-hanging and easy to pick because they're juicy and ripe. Now, at the same time, the first fruits showed the quantity and quality of the remaining harvest. The 144,000 are faithful and committed to the Lord, pure and blameless. It says that no lie will even be found in their mouths. So this is the people that God is using. They're committed to him. They're willing to follow him. They're willing to pursue him above anything else, including marriage or family, and they're willing to risk their lives for him. We should be willing to do the same. We should also strive for this type of pure, blameless, holy, committed lifestyle. Now, many people hurl accusations against the church, and they claim the church is full of hypocrites. In fact, sometimes they're right. But in this passage, we see these believers are faithfully following the Lord. Zealously, they're putting him first, and they're fruitful. Their ministry leads to many others being saved. So what specific thing can you learn from their example and apply in the coming week? How can you yourself be more devoted to the Lord and love him rather than this world? So verses 1 through 5 remind us that even though the times will be dark, God is working. He has selected, he has chosen 144,000 people who are going to be his witnesses, his messengers to a lost world. These will face many tribulations, many trials, even they will be martyred and come before the throne. But they're not complaining. They don't have a grudge against God. In fact, they are praising him with a new song. They are in his presence. He will never, ever abandon them. Now let's go forward to the second part of this passage, and we're going to see 3 angelic messages. And we'll see that starting from verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead, with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." Another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image, and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name." Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." Okay, so we see 3 angels. And these angels, it says, are actually flying overhead. And they are flying around giving a message. They are proclaiming God's message to this earth. Now, the vast majority of the time, God uses people to witness to other people. He could do it different ways. He could write it in the sky. He could voice it by himself, just shouting it, proclaiming it to the world. It could be through thunder or birds or any other way which God sought to give his message. But he normally does it through the mouths of other people. Only on very rare occasions does he directly intervene by sending his angels to this earth to give a message. That means it's very important. And that's what we see happening in this passage. 3 times he sends an angelic messenger flying around the earth with special messages. And we see that these messages, it says, will go out to every nation and tribe and language and people. No one will be left out. So why is it that in this case, God uses angels to deliver his message rather than people? Well, I think it's going to be a time that will be very difficult for believers to openly share the gospel. The 144,000 are already martyred, and those who speak out in public for the Lord will quickly be arrested and killed. So believers will be hiding, they will be running, they will be fleeing, and they will be put to death very quickly. But God is still not done. He's still going to accomplish his plans with or without people. When people will be unable to spread the message, he'll do it another way. Now, from this, we can see a wonderful and beautiful lesson of God's mercy. Every person on earth, do you see that? Every person on earth will be able to hear this message from God. Everyone who's not yet taken the mark will have yet another chance to repent. Now, one common question people ask is, what will happen to the person who has never heard the gospel? And I believe this passage shows us that God can and does work in ways we may not expect to spread his message. In the Old Testament, there's a figure called Melchizedek. He's a priest and a king who meets Abraham. And there's really no record of this priest king outside of this short account in Genesis. But he was a king who believed in God. And he was a servant of the Most High. Where did he hear about the Lord? We don't know. But he did. God got the message to him. I once heard a story of a missionary who went to an isolated tribe to share the good news. And when the missionary got there, he found out that they were immediately ready to accept the gospel. And they said, we've been waiting for this news for a long time. We knew there was a good creator, a loving creator. We knew that we had sin and that we needed help and that we couldn't save ourselves. And we want to know more. They even said that they had a vision which showed them that God was sending someone to tell this message to them. And they said, you are those people God was telling us about in this vision, and we want to know more. And most from this tribe came to faith in the Lord. God is going to keep doing his work. God is going to get his message to every single person he wants to hear it. And this time, in Revelation, they will all have a chance. Isaiah 59:1 says, behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened, that it cannot save, or his ear dull, that it cannot hear. God is not restrained to save those whom he wishes to save by anything, whether it's the church's failure to go, or because of some disobedience, or intense persecution, or any other reason. So we should be encouraged to more fully trust in the goodness and the mercy of God. It's very easy for us to cast blame on God and say, why does God do this or that? Or why doesn't he send more missionaries? Or why doesn't he send angels? Or why doesn't he save these people? But we need to remember, God loves these people. God loves the world much, much more than we do. He will get his message out. Revelation 14:7 tells us the first message. And the first message is fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. So fear God, give him glory, and worship him. Now, during this period, if you remember from the last chapter, we have seen that the Antichrist is going to demand the world's worship. He and the false prophet will do many signs to deceive the world. And the goal is going to be to convince people that the Antichrist is God. So the world says, worship Satan. But the angel's message is simple, worship God. And what's the difference between the two? Well, obviously there's many, but what we see in this passage, it says, worship him who made heaven and earth. Worship the real God. Worship the creator. He's the one who actually made everything. That's God, not these other pretenders or imposters. Luke 12:4-5 says, I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he is killed, has authority to cast into hell. fear God, worship God, not anything else. Now, Satan at that time in the future will tell people, worship me. And he'll say, if you don't, I'll kill you. And so many people say, what choice do I have? I have to do it. But God says, fear me, because I not only have power over your body, but I also have power over your soul. Who do you fear? There's many lessons we can get from this passage, but what I want to think about now is, whom do you fear? We don't live in such an extreme time as a tribulation, but yet many authorities and media or society seeks to pressure and intimidate believers. A boss may threaten to fire you if you don't forge a paper. A teacher may threaten to fail you if you don't bow to a certain agenda. But they have no power over your soul. Fear God and not man. That's the first message from the first angel. The second message from the second angel. Another angel, a second, followed, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine and the passion of her sexual immorality. Babylon the Great is described in more detail in Revelation 17 through 18. But in short, it is the world system which sets itself up in opposition to God. Now, Satan is behind this world system, this world order, and it's present throughout all ages. First, seen clearly at the time of the Tower of Babel. But in the tribulation, his government will not just be a world power, but will be the world power. Now, as always, Satan seeks to win people to his side through lies. He will make many, many false promises. He will promise fun, wealth, luxury, thrill, sexual pleasures, everything you want. There's no restrictions, no boundaries, no rules. Well, worship him. You can do whatever you want. You can enjoy yourself. It will be a utopia, a dream life with no authority except for him. And you can do whatever you want, unless what you want is different than what he wants, in which case you'll be killed. But besides that, it's very, very free. Now, people love free handouts. People will love the idea, oh, I can sin with no repercussion. I can have free love, free sex, alcohol to my delight. I can have drugs. I can have whatever I want, and it's all within the law. There's no crime for doing any of these things. Well, the angelic message is a warning that these pleasures are fleeting. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It's going to fall. It's short. It's temporary. It doesn't last. It's not permanent. It's the same lesson we get in 1 John 2:15 through 16. Do not love the world or the things in the world. They're temporary. They fade away. If you were to look around you in the room that you're in right now and just take a quick look, how many of those things that you see are going to last? How many of them are permanent? Everything you see is not going to last. Your electronics around you, your bed or your sofa or your television or your phone, all of it is going to fade away. Even the human body, if there's people around you whom you see, the human body itself too will fade away. The only thing permanent, eternal around you is the souls of people, including your own soul. So don't focus on the pleasures and on the fun and on the materials and the temporary. Focus on God, who cares about your eternal soul. Now, the world always offers many free pleasures, like pornography and many, many other things like this, but it's not free at all. All of these sinful pleasures come at a cost. And any of these pleasures are temporary and not fulfilling. You will want more and more and more, and it will never, ever satisfy. The third message from the third angel, verse 9 through 11. Another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest, day or night. These worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. So here is the response to the Antichrist propaganda machine. The Antichrist in this one world order will say, follow me, you can have whatever you want, it's wonderful, you'll have lots of fun, it will be a thrill. His PR team will be very active all over the media, extolling the amazing benefits and utopia awaiting those who receive the mark. The convenience that it will be, the belonging that you will have, the protections that it will offer. It will most likely sound that taking this mark will be the ticket to a worldwide paradise, a place of unity and fun for all. But the angel gives a very different message. He announces eternal doom and judgment upon those who decide in favor of taking the mark. So do you see God's grace? The whole world is being pressured. Take the mark, take the mark. God sends an angel to fly all around the world, broadcasting God's message from the heavens. Don't take the mark. Don't take the mark. If you take the mark, if you choose Satan, if you follow that way, what's going to happen? You will be destroyed. You will drink the wine of God's wrath, and you will be tormented with fire and sulfur. And this torment will last forever and ever. For all of those who are worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. This is grace from God. God doesn't remain silent and let you make a bad choice, and then people say, I didn't know. God makes sure that you know. He says, if you take the mark, this is going to be the result. A, B, C. Don't take it. You see, God is gracious. He tells us what we need to know to be saved. He tells us what we need to know to choose the right path. And yet many people will risk eternity in hell for the sake of a short-term, simple pleasure. There are tests done for children, experiments where they let a child sit down at a table, for example, and put a marshmallow in front of him and then walk out of the room and tell the kid, if you don't eat the marshmallow within the 5 minutes, then when I come back, I will give you a whole bag and show, okay, this is the bag of marshmallows I will give you if you don't eat it. But most of those kids, during the 5 minutes, they might resist for a moment, but finally they would want to take that and eat it. They choose short-term pleasure over a better thing long-term. Although having a lot of marshmallows, is that really better? Well, that's a story for another day. But the point is, people choose the short-term pleasure. They don't think long-term. That's the problem. And I hope that you will think long-term about the choices that you make. Don't just enjoy the moment or enjoy today. These things are fading. Now, if we go forward, this is back to John being the narrator writing this. He says, here's a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. This is one of the key messages of the book of Revelation. Endure. Endure. Persecution is going to get worse. Believers are going to be reviled for their faith. Those taking the name of Christ will have a target on their backs. Many will be martyred. Deliverance is not promised. That is deliverance on this earth. They're called to endure. Endure to the end. Even death. Knowing that even if you die, your soul will come immediately into God's presence and into God's protection. And that knowledge should give you hope and boldness to endure. Now, if believers are called to endure during that most wicked time, in that highest pressure situation where the whole world is trying to push you into its mold and pressure you into sin, and at that point it says endure, how much more should we endure now when the pressures we face are much less than what they will face then? Now, it's easy to trust in God and to follow him when things are going smoothly. When he's just given you a new promotion, oh, thank God, he's the best. But how about when you just lose your job? It's easy to thank God when things are going well. There are many challenges that we face today, not even to talk about then in the end times, but today, that require endurance. Maybe you face some of these. Family separation, difficult relationships, chronic pain, health issues, failures in business or school, childlessness, death of loved ones, hostility and pressure from the world. The book of Revelation is a call to endure. Now, it's much easier to start than it is to finish. According to some statistics, 17% of people drop out of marathon races and don't finish. Now, I expect the number of people who drop out of the Christian walk after professing Christ is much higher than that. Now, if you were to think about even your own little circle of friends, people you know, and if you think back years to the Bible studies you've gone to and the fellowships you've been part of, you can probably think of many who have deserted the faith. People face temptation and pressure, and many do not endure. Sometimes it's complacency or persecution, loss of their first love, sexual immorality, or many, many other things. What's the solution? We see a verse in Philippians 1:6. And I'm sure of this, he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. We trust in God's power in our lives. And at the same time, we are to cooperate with him. A marathon is finished one step at a time. When you're tired and thirsty and weak, every step can be a challenge. And if you think about the finish line and think the finish line is so far away, I have so far to go, it's easy to get discouraged. For myself, sometimes I go swimming and I swim laps for exercise. And if I think, for example, I want to swim a mile or say 1,400 meters or so, sometimes when I'm swimming in the first several laps, I think, wow, I have so far left to go, and it could be discouraging and I might want to give up. But if I just take it one stroke at a time, it's much, much easier. Now, the Christian life is the same. Every day, a new battle. Each day, we're called to be faithful and endure. Once you add up all of those steps, day by day by day, making the right choice, serving God, putting him first, it will take you to the finish line where the eternal blessings await. This is a message from Revelation. Endure to the end. All right, so this takes us through verse 13, and he says, if you do endure, then you will be blessed because you will be able to rest from your labor. Now let's go forward to the last part, which is the harvest of the earth in verses 14 through 20. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, put in your sickle, and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth, and gathered the grape harvest of the earth, and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. The harvest of the earth. What is this harvest? Well, let's get into it and look at this verse by verse. Verse 14, he says, I looked, and behold, a white cloud, seated on the cloud, one like a son of man. Now, at first glance, you might think this is Jesus. After all, the Son of Man is a messianic phrase that refers to the Messiah. However, in this case, it appears that it may not be Jesus for three reasons. First, the Greek word used here for crown is stephanos. That is not the type of crown that a king wears. Rather, the type that athletes wear to denote their victory. Is the same type of crown that the same word used for the crown that will be given to believers who overcome. whereas a diadem is the crown that kings wear, and that's the word used for the many crowns on Jesus' head in Revelation 19. Also, verse 15, it says, another angel came out of the temple. So if there was another angel, then it appears in verse 14 that in fact this was an angel. And then also in verse 15, this angel gives a command to the one in verse 14. Another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap. So it's very unlikely that any angel is going to be giving a command to Jesus. Therefore, in verse 14, it would appear that this is not Jesus. Most likely it is an angel who looks like a son of man, who appears as a man. We know angels sometimes take the form of a man. Okay, so there's going to be a harvest. In fact, there's two harvests mentioned. Verses 15 and 16 is the first harvest, and then later in this chapter is a second harvest. He says, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. This ties in with verse 13, which describes the martyrdom that believers are going to face. Verse 13 says, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on, so that they can rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. So verse 13 says there's going to be a lot of martyrs. We see the same thing in Daniel 7:25. He shall speak words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High. This is talking about the Antichrist. He shall wear out the saints. Many, many believers are going to be killed during this period of time. Now, in the Bible, reaping a harvest is generally a good thing. So this first harvest seems to be a harvest of believers. Believers who hear the message of Revelation 14, verses 14 through 16 should be encouraged. It may appear to them they're under the power and dominion of the evil one, but God is sovereign. And God views this as a good thing. I'm going to take them off of this earth where they're being persecuted, where they're being tortured, where they're being martyred, and I'm going to bring them up immediately to my presence. Now consider this. The world at that time will be the most wicked in all of human history. Satan will be openly worshipped. Everyone will want to hunt down and kill believers. So God says, okay, you want to kill believers? All right. He allows believers to be martyred, thus removing them from the earth and taking them immediately and safely to his presence. So for believers, death is not a curse. It's a blessing, just as when a good harvest of crops is brought in. Now, this harvest doesn't occur all at once, but it's throughout the second half of the tribulation period. Now, what lesson can we learn from this? Looking at persecution can be disheartening, and it may discourage you from sharing your faith because of fear of the consequences. You might think about your school or your work or your neighborhood that you live in and think, when I share the gospel, people are offended, people don't like me, people persecute me. And that might discourage you from sharing your faith. But when we look at it from God's perspective, we see to him that even martyrdom is a precious thing. And I don't think you're going to, at least now, probably depending on where you live, you probably are not going to be martyred for living out your faith in God. But even if you are, this is a precious thing because you can come immediately into the presence of God. So the thing is, we need to look beyond the short-term persecution into the heavenly reward for being faithful. We need to think past the instant gratification of taking the marshmallow in the first 5 minutes and think about the result when we don't choose this world but choose God's way instead. So this is the first harvest. There's also going to be a second harvest. We see this in verse 17. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. So there's a contrast here. There's one angel with a sickle, and now there's another angel with a sickle, but this sickle, this angel is going to be doing something very, very different. It's a second and different harvest carried out by a second and different angel. He also receives a command from the angel who has authority over the fire. It says, and the command is, put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So here is the harvest of grapes. These grapes of the vine will be gathered and thrown into the great winepress, of the wrath of God. It's a very violent image. And in verse 20, it says this winepress will be trodden. Now, think about how wine is made, and you'll get the idea that's being talked about here. Grapes are all put together, and then people stand on it and step on it and smash, 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 and then the juice flows out. It's a violent image. This idea that the grapes are going to be trodden is also a violent image that shows God is going to trod on his enemies. Now, there's a comfort for believers. It says that this is going to happen outside the city. Most likely that's a reference to Jerusalem and a reminder that God's judgment is going to target unbelievers who are targeting God's people. It will result in death and destruction. Vast numbers of unbelieving will be slain as a result of God's wrath. It says that the blood will flow to the height of 600 stadia. Now, a stadia is a Greek unit of measurement equivalent to about 600 feet. It will flow to the height of a horse's bridle for 600 stadia. So the total distance described here will be 180 miles or 300 kilometers. Is that literal or not? Some people say, wow, that amount of blood is too much. It's impossible. Nothing's impossible with God, of course, but it also doesn't say that all of the blood is at that height for the entire distance the whole time. It could, for example, be more like a tsunami of blood which reaches that height and then flows through all the way up to that distance. We don't know exactly what it will be like, but the point is this, that God is going to pour out his wrath on unbelievers. It's going to be a time of divine judgment. Now, both of these harvests are described in poetic terms. So the timeline, when are these things going to happen? When is the first harvest? When is the second harvest? Both of these harvests appear to be summaries of what is going on in the second half of the tribulation. First, believers will be martyred. That's the first harvest. And then after that, God's divine retribution will be poured out on those who supported and caused the first harvest, those who caused the martyrdom of those believers. So this chapter seems to be forward-looking in Revelation rather than something that's taking place at this precise chronological moment in this story. And seen that way, it's meant to encourage the saints. The main point from this chapter is simple. It's a call for endurance. We're to take comfort in the fact that in the midst of this darkest of times in human history, God still is watching over his people. He chooses 144,000 witnesses. He uses them to reach out to many more. And even when those people are martyred, they come directly into his presence. And then all of those unbelievers who caused it to happen, they will be judged. And also, God's mercy is shown because he gives everyone a chance. He sends out these 3 angelic messengers who fly around the world and they tell people God's message. Fear God. Give glory to him. Worship him. Second, don't take the mark. Do not take the mark of the beast or worship the image. Because if you do, then you will be punished. Sorry, that was the third. And then the second one is fallen is Babylon the Great. Everything that you see in this world is temporary. Let's have a long-term perspective and endure rather than a short-term perspective and just choose comfort and pleasure for today. I hope that this passage was encouraging for you as we remember that God is always working in this world. He's always putting his message out. He's working in the lives of unbelievers. He's giving his message to believers, to unbelievers alike. All around the world, God is spreading his message, and he's telling people to fear him, to worship him, to choose him while they still can. Because if they don't, then A, B, and C, and all of these other things are going to happen to them later. So, a call for endurance of the saints. Endurance starts with today. Let's endure for the rest of today, and then tomorrow, and then into the future. Thank you so much for listening as we studied Revelation chapter 14. I would invite you to join us next time as we continue this study in Revelation 15. God bless you, and see you then.